what are you seeing as the biggest challenges that companies are facing when it comes to compensation?
I think, first of all, that we've really spent no time on it. I see compensation as the equivalent of pricing internally. And just like we've been really emphasizing through the pandemic, now that we've got inflation, that you better get on top of pricing. Otherwise, you're going to see your margins squeezed. And you really need to think about the strategy of pricing. As you know, it's the single largest expense for a lot of companies, at least it's there in the top 2 or 3. And it's as tricky to get right as pricing because we're dealing with people. And one of the things we know is people are not rational. They're irrational. And so you've got to really understand psychology in both setting price and compensation.
Not just about the relationship between an employee and an employer. It's also about the relationship and how that compensation impacts the relationship that the employees are having between the company and the customer. So can you talk a little bit about those relationships and that dynamic?
Yeah, you're right. We often think, as you said, comp is this private conversation between the employer and the employee, but we've really got to take into account the other employees, what I'm going to call the culture, and we've got to take into account what's good for both the customer and the company. And so you've got the culture aligned around what it is that they need to do to support each other. It obviously delivers what's most important for the customer, no breakage. And as a result, then they've got great ratings, which is then driving the revenue and repeat business and referrals that really helps the company. So the culture, the customer, and the company wins by this simple move that they made in pivoting that 3% from the insurance companies to now divvying it up among the employees.
It's not necessarily needing more money to pay your employees, but maybe just reallocating some other expenses to reward and incentivize the behaviors.
It is, and in fact, we can kind of go one step further. I think what's critical is a mindset that it's not what you pay people. You need to kind of get that out of your head. There's some positions where they might be able to make more than the CEO, in particularly sales positions and others. No, what you want to focus on is your total labor cost per dollar of revenue. And what we're really encouraging is what's called a good job strategy. It's really answering this question: would you like to have a whole lot less better paid smart people, or do you want to have a whole lot more lower paid, and I might use the phrase, dumber people or less talented people? And so we think you've got an opportunity to take that existing pool of money that you've got and decide right now, under the cover of a recession, inflation, to right size the organization. And what we discover is that in every position inside a company, from sales to John Summers, who is in commercial printing, he had a guy out in his factory called a cutter. After they print the paper, then it has to be cut before it can be bound. And I sent John out there to see, do you really have folks, for instance, that are cutting the paper that are 2, 3, 4 times more productive than everyone else? And he came back and actually shared on a public event that we did. He found a guy in his company that's doing 10 times what the other cutters can do. And so what you've got to then be careful is to make sure you're compensating that person, treating them fairly and paid differently than the other cutters. And then what you want to do is you want to find more guys like him so that you've got less people paid more. That way you've got golden handcuffs on them, but you can have a total lower labor cost, which makes you competitive in the marketplace.
That's great. And I think so many organizations kind of default to compensation as an expense.
Yeah.
And what you're urging leaders to think of is, how do we make compensation a strategic driver of results?
The worst thing you can do is hear about somebody else's comp plan, like Mike O'Hagan's, and just wholesale copy it without considering, hey, does this align with what the customer wants, align with the culture, and what is going to be beneficial to the company? The real consideration of your culture and what it is that the customer wants. So that's number one, that first and foremost, it needs to be different. Number two, it's really about fairness, not sameness. And I want to say that again, it's about fairness, not sameness. We have kind of an opening quote one of the most unequal things you could do is to pay unequal people equal. So it goes back to, if you truly have some performers that can outperform other people in the same position, it's not fair that they're paid the same amount. So what does all of that mean? You want to start with base pay. And one of the challenges inside companies, Alex, is employees are constantly coming to their employer and saying, what do I need to do to advance around here? Well, that's just a code word for how can I make more money? And because most small to mid-sized companies don't have the layers of management, thank goodness, there's really no way to advance up. And the large companies are cleaning those layers out. So what you've really got to do is structure jobs with the right metrics so that somebody has the opportunity to make twice as much as you might starting in that position. And the analogy I like to use is professional sports teams. If you look at a team, do all the players in the same position make the same amount of money? And it's not even close. The first string's making considerably more than the second string or third string person in that position. And you need to recognize that inside your own organizations.